You are now listening to Mark's Unexplained World by Mark the Medium, available on Apple Podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Prime, Podbean and most other podcast platforms. Tonight's episode is about the Maury Island UFO. So it's over to you now, Mark, for this week's unidentified story.
The Maury Island UFO incident refers to claims made by two men named Fred Crisman and Harold Dahl of not just falling debris from the sky, but also threats made by the Men in Black following sightings of unidentified flying objects over Maury Island, Washington, in the United States. Harold Dahl said that one of the objects began spewing forth with what looked like, well, to him anyway, thousands of newspapers from somewhere inside of its centre, with these newspapers turning out to be a white type of very lightweight metal. And Fred Crisman, who also investigated the incident at the time, claimed in several interviews that he not only witnessed the unusual craft, but that he had also recovered UFO debris from the Maury Island incident itself. The two men in question claim that these events occurred on the 21st of June in 1947. And approximately a month later, on the 1st of August, two Air Force officers who were tasked with investigating the UFO incident were killed when their plane crashed outside of Kelso in Washington. The Maury Island UFO incident itself has been widely regarded, even by believers of flying saucers and UFOs, as a hoax. And the chief of Project Blue Book, Edward J. Ruppelt, characterised the Maury UFO incident story as the dirtiest hoax in UFO history. Greetings, Unexplainers. Thank you for tuning in once again and listening to this UFO swilling episode of Mark's Unexplained World. My name is Mark Hughes. I'm not a UFO. I'm a medium, a ufologist, a true crime buff, and a man with a very dark and disturbed sense of humour who very quickly realised that good health is merely the slowest possible rate at which one can die. But just to give you a better idea of who I am and what I do, every week, usually on a Tuesday night, though occasionally on a Wednesday, allowing for bank holidays and busy weekends, I do a podcast on the many wide and various subjects that fall under the Unexplained banner. These include ufology, hauntings, disasters, and all sorts of other paranormal phenomena, including true crime, unsolved crime, serial killers, and the occasional missing person that often goes unnoticed. So, if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review or an opinion of this episode's subject that I can reply to, a thumbs up, and subscribe to my channel. Or if you are listening on any of the other podcast platforms, again, give us a like and a follow. And if you do get a few minutes, perhaps you might like to check out my social media groups and pages, including Facebook, Instagram or TikTok, which are filled daily with all things unexplained and crime. I'll put the links to some of my socials in the description. In this episode, I'm going to tell you about the Did It Really Happen story surrounding the Maury Island UFO. And this week's necessary disclaimer, well, this tale does sadly involve people dying through misadventure, so may prove upsetting to some. As usual, you listen at your own discretion. Also, all opinions and comments are strictly my own, but the facts of the case still remain. I also apologise if I pronounce anything incorrectly. My English, although it is my first and only language, helped me realise that me coming to any conclusion is the part where I just got tired of thinking. But anyway, let us get back to the story. According to Wikipedia, Maury Island is a tide island, or what's otherwise known as a landform consisting of an island, located in Puget Sound in the US state of Washington. It is connected to Vashon Island by an isthmus, which is a narrow piece of land connecting two larger areas across an expanse of water by which they are otherwise separated, that was built by local homeowners in 1913. Maury Island itself is rural, with large areas of farmland forest and relatively undeveloped shoreline. However, at the time of writing this show anyway, environmental issues on the island were under considerable scrutiny. It was named in 1841 during the Wilkes expedition in honour of William Lewis Maury, who, between the 1863 and 1864, raided Union ships on behalf of the Confederacy and is buried in Caroline County, Virginia. In the 1940s, Vashon Island had a chamber of commerce that acted more like a community council rather than a traditional chamber, and by the 1950s, the precursor to today's community council was organised and called itself the Civic Assembly. Today, the Community Council is charged with working to preserve the rural nature of both the Vashon and Maury Islands. Before I get into the Maury Island incident itself, I want to first look at the two men, Fred Crisman and Harold Dahl, who were involved as witnesses to the event. Well, Fred Lee Crisman, who was born on the 22nd of July in 1919 and passed away on the 10th of December in 1975 at just 56 years old, was both a fighter pilot and a later educator from Tacoma in Washington, who was known for his claims of paranormal events along with ties to many 20th century conspiracies. On the 26th of May in 1942, Fred Crisman enlisted in the Army, entering the service with the rank of a second lieutenant, and in 1943 he was listed as an aviation cadet undergoing training at Lancaster in California, achieving both the Air Medal and the Distinguished Flying Cross Awards. And he then left the Army as a first lieutenant on the 19th of February in 1946. After he left the Army in 1946, he then started to make claims that he battled mysterious and evil underground creatures to free himself from a cave in what is now known as northern Pakistan during the Second World War, with his story being picked up and published in the June of that year by an American science fiction magazine called Amazing Stories. And in the following year, he attempted to convince two early flying saucer witnesses that lava rocks were in fact debris dropped from a flying saucer. As an educator in 1953, Fred Crisman worked as a teacher and administrator in the high schools in Washington and Oregon, and in the December of that same year he served as the director of the high school drama club. But it wasn't all plain sailing for our intrepid UFO witness, as on the 15th of April in 1957 he was charged with drunken disorderly, resisting arrest and pulling a firearm on the arresting police officer, and so was consequently fined $100. But hey, no one's perfect. In 1968, Fred Crisman was subpoenaed by a New Orleans grand jury in the prosecution of a local man for the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, which was a prosecution that would later be dramatised in the 1991 Oliver Stone film JFK. He had a mixed and somewhat varied life, with various conspiracy authors considering him as a, and I quote, a nexus point for a number of conspiracies and cover-ups from the late 1940s until his death in 1975. Fred Crisman's fellow UFO witness, Harold Dahl, on the other hand, is a little bit of a mystery. I did manage to find a little information on him from the Medium website, which was written and researched by the Lover of Mysteries author, Richard Goldrick Jr. Harold Albert Dahl, who was possibly born on the 15th of August in 1911, was either a lumber scavenger or a harbour patrolman who had a 15-year-old son named Charles in 1947 and lived in Tacoma, Washington with his wife, but her name remains unknown. According to some reports, he and his family completely bolted from the town of Tacoma abruptly on or around the August of 1947, apparently in some form of terror, and were never heard from again. But I think it's only fair to point out here that there have been many banded speculations as to why his family decided to disappear. However, again, according to reports from the Medium website, Harold Dahl was a somewhat enterprising guy, and in the 1950s he paid for numerous small classified newspaper listings or ads offering to buy furniture and scraps, and it does appear that he was quite successful in his trade, as later on, in 1950, his scrap and furniture business advertisements then got much more elaborate. His business then stopped operating sometime in or before the year of 1954, and the next chapter of his life appears to begin in 1978 with his divorce in Thurston County, Washington. Harold Dahl then passed away at the age of 70 on the 30th of January in 1982, and he is buried in the Fernhill Cemetery, Aberdeen, in Washington. After this first short break, in part 2, we will look at the story of the Maury UFO incident and the involvement of the early ufologist Kenneth Arnold.
This show is brought to you courtesy of Neil Packer and the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre. Find them online at www.hauntedresearchcentre.com or at 9 to 11 Regent Street, Hinckley, LE10 1AW. Open on Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. for guided tours of the haunted rooms at just £3 per person. Booking is essential at all times, and over 16s only, please, unless accompanied by an adult. The haunted rooms are extremely haunted, and paranormal activity could and has taken place at any time. Some areas and particular objects or items can be quite scary and unnerving. Membership is available for £25 to qualify for selective offers. And why not download the app, available on both iOS and Android, for only $3.99, to keep up to date with what is coming up at the centre.
On the 29th of July in 1947, The early ufologist Kenneth Arnold interviewed one of the Maury Island UFO witnesses, Harold Dahl, who reported that, and I quote, On June the 21st, 1947, in the afternoon, about 2 o'clock, I was patrolling the east bay of Maury Island. I, as captain, was steering my patrol boat close to the shore of a bay on Maury Island. On board were 2 crewmen, my 15-year-old son and his dog. As I looked up from the wheel of my boat, I noticed 6 very large donut-shaped aircraft. Harold Dahl then continued to report that one of the objects, and again I quote, began spewing forth what seemed like thousands of newspapers from somewhere on the inside of its centre. These newspapers, which turned out to be a white type of very lightweight metal, gently fluttered to the earth. And, also according to Dahl, a substance resembling lava rocks fell onto their boat, both breaking a worker's arm and killing their dog. Harold Dahl also claimed that his superior officer and fellow witness, Fred Crisman, also investigated the incident, with Crisman then being interviewed again by Kenneth Arnold, reporting to having both recovered debris from Maury Island and having witnessed the unusual craft. Before I go back to the Maury Island incident, I want to take a closer look as to how Kenneth Arnold got involved in the subject of ufology. Well, it all started on the 24th of June in 1947, when Kenneth Arnold was flying from Chehalis to Yakima in Washington on a business trip in a Cool Air A2, which is an American 2 to 3-seater utility aircraft. And whilst on this trip, he decided to make a brief detour after learning of a $5,000 reward, which is the equivalent to a $70,000 in today's money for the discovery of a US Marine Corps C-46 transport airplane that had crashed near Mount Rainier. And by all accounts, it was good flying weather conditions with completely clear skies, along with a gentle wind. A few minutes before 3 p.m, at around 9,200 feet or 2,800 metres in altitude and near Mineral in Washington, Kenneth Arnold had pretty much given up his search for the downed airplane and so began heading eastward back towards Yakima, when he suddenly noticed a bright flashing light that was similar to sunlight reflecting from one of the mirrors on his utility aircraft. Worried that he might be dangerously close to another aircraft, Kenneth Arnold then scanned the skies around him, but all he could detect was a DC-4 about 15 miles or 24 kilometres away behind him to his left. About 30 seconds after him seeing the first flash of light, Kenneth Arnold then saw a series of bright flashes in the distance off to his left, which were then around 20 to 25 miles, or 32 to 40 kilometres away. At first he thought the reflections might be just sunlight on his airplane's windows, but after a few quick tests, like rocking his airplane from side to side, removing his eyeglasses, and then later rolling down his side window, he ruled this out. He then realised that the reflections came from 9 objects flying in a long chain in the distance. For a few moments, Kenneth Arnold thought that these 9 objects might be nothing more than a flock of geese. However, he quickly ruled this out for a number of reasons, which included things like the altitude, the bright glint, and obviously the very high speed that they were travelling. He then reported as these 9 objects quickly approached Mount Rainier, and that when they passed in front of him, they started to appear darker in profile against the bright white snowfield that was covering its peak, but still giving off bright flashes of light as they flipped around erratically. Kenneth Arnold also described these objects as a series of convex shapes, although he did later reveal that one of the objects differed from the other 8 by being more crescent-shaped. Several years later, Kenneth Arnold would state in various interviews that he likened the object's movement to saucers skipping on water, without actually comparing their shapes to saucers. But his initial quotes do indeed have him comparing the object shaped to either a saucer, a disc, a pie pan, or a half moon. As the 9 objects passed Mount Rainier, Kenneth Arnold then turned his plane southward on a parallel course. And it was at this point that he opened his side window and began observing the objects, unobstructed by any glass that might have produced reflections. The objects then continued to move very rapidly southward without any interruption, moving forward from his position. Curious about their speed, Kenneth Arnold then began to time their rate of passage, noting that they moved from Mount Rainier to Mount Adams, where they faded from view, at a distance of around 50 miles, or 80 kilometres, in 1 minute and 42 seconds, according to the clock on his instrument panel in front of him. When he later had time to do the calculation, he worked out that their speed was over 1,700 miles per hour, which was about 3 times faster than any other manned aircraft in 1947. However, with him not knowing the exact distance where the objects faded from view, Kenneth Arnold conservatively and arbitrarily rounded this down to 1,200 miles or 1,900 kilometres an hour, which is still faster than any known aircraft for that time that had yet to break the sound barrier. Starting on the 26th and 27th of June in 1947, newspapers first began using the terms flying saucer and flying disc, or in some cases just the word disc, to describe any unidentified flying objects. And so, due to this naming, the Kenneth Arnold sighting is credited with giving rise to these popular terms. But back to the 29th of July in 1947, where the early ufologist Kenneth Arnold was interviewing friend Crisman and Harold Dahl, the Maury Island UFO witnesses. In order to get help with his investigation, Kenneth Arnold first recruited a Captain E.J. Smith of United Airlines, who had also reported witnessing a flying disc on the 4th of July in 1947. On a quick interesting side note here, the event that I am referring to is known as the Flight 105 UFO sighting, which occurred on the aforementioned date of the 4th of July in 1947, when 3 crew members aboard a United Airlines flight, which included Captain E.J. Smith, reported seeing multiple unidentified flying objects in the skies over the Pacific Northwest. The incident itself was amongst at least 800 similar sightings in the United States that had happened within a few weeks in the summer of 1947, but this was the first report that was made by professional pilots. The US military, being in their usual position of self-denial, ultimately attributed what the crew members saw as nothing but ordinary aircraft, balloons, birds, or just pure illusion. But strangely enough, no weather balloons. Fred Crisman showed the white metal debris, which he claimed came spewing forth like thousands of newspapers from the inside of the UFO, to both Kenneth Arnold and Captain E.J. Smith. However, both men interpreted his findings as rather mundane and inconsistent with Harold Dahl's description. So Kenneth Arnold then decided to contact a Lieutenant Frank Brown of military intelligence in California, who arrived at Arnold's hotel in Tacoma, along with a Captain William L. Davidson. Both Davidson and Brown conducted interviews with the Maury Island UFO witnesses, Fred Crisman and Harold Dahl, collected fragments, and then prepared for the return flight to California out of McCord's airfield. However, in the early hours of the 1st of August in 1947, the B-25 Mitchell that the two officers, Captain W.L. Davidson and Lieutenant Frank Brown, were piloting crashed outside of Kelso, Washington, killing both men. After this second short break, in part 3, we will look at the continuing story around the Maury Island UFO incident and its legacy.
Fright Nights was established in 1999 as the first company in the world to offer overnight ghost hunt experiences to the general public, pioneering paranormal events since the last century. Fright Nights operate at hundreds of the UK's most haunted and exclusive venues. All events have their own team of experienced paranormal investigators, mediums and psychics. They have a VIP members club for regular returning guests, offering loyalty discounts and exclusive invitation-only events. They can also host private events for your family and friends. You can contact them on 07 852 998 628 or email them at office@frightnights.co.uk, or take a look at their website at www.frightnights.co.uk, where you can see the many locations they investigate and learn about them and the opportunities they have available. Hundreds of ghost hunters join Fright Nights every month for the most thrilling ghost hunting experiences they'll never forget. If you haven't been on a ghost hunt before, then why not join them to see what it's all about? Why not visit their social media sites for up-to-date information on all the places they visit and to see what's coming up in the future? They look forward to seeing you all soon. Fright Nights Ghost Hunting Events. Remember, only the original will do.
After the crash that killed the two officers, Captain W.L. Davidson and Lieutenant Frank Brown, on the 1st of August in 1947 outside Kelso in Washington, the FBI, otherwise known as the Federal Bureau of Investigation, then began a formal investigation into Harold Dahl and Fred Crisman's claim of the UFO on Maury Island, quickly determining that these claims were false, making special notice that Harold Dahl himself stated that, and I quote, "It questioned by the authorities, he was going to say it was a hoax because he did not want any further trouble from the matter or over the matter." The FBI files also detail a few alternative stories that were communicated by both Fred Crisman and Harold Dahl to other local newspapers and media outlets, and concluded that the two men had also contacted a variety of other publications, and I quote,
"in the hope of building up their story through publicity to a point where they could make a profitable deal with Fantasy Magazine of Chicago, Illinois."
In 1956, Air Force officer and Chief of Project Blue Book, Edward J. Ruppel, concluded that, and I quote, "The whole Maury Island mystery was a hoax. The first, possibly the second best, and the dirtiest hoax in the UFO history." He continues, and again I quote, "The majority of the writers of saucer lore have played this sighting to the hilt, pointing out as their main premise the fact that the story must be true because the government never openly exposed or prosecuted either of the two hoaxes. Now, this is a logical premise, but a false one. The reason for the thorough investigation of the Maury Island hoax was that the government had thought seriously of prosecuting the men. At the last minute it was decided, after talking to the two men, that the hoax was a harmless joke that had mushroomed, and that the loss of 2 lives and a B-25 could not be directly blamed on the two men." Despite the FBI promptly determining that the entire Maury Island incident was a hoax, its story has been retold many times over the years, with a couple of examples being the American writer Gray Barker, who is best known for his books about UFOs and other paranormal phenomena, with his 1956 book, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, which helped to popularise the concept of the Men in Black, going into detail regarding the Maury incident. Also, the debunked Majestic 12 documents, which referred to the Maury Island story, claiming that the metal fragments that Fred Crisman claims came spewing forth like thousands of newspapers from inside the UFO, were part of a nuclear reactor and had been turned over to the CIA. On a quick but interesting side note here, the Majestic 12, which is also known as Magic 12 and MJ12 for short, is a purported organisation that appeared in fake documents first circulated by ufologists in 1984 and that some UFO conspiracy theorists still claim to have existed. The organisation is claimed to be a code name of an alleged secret committee of scientists, military leaders and government officials that was formed in 1947 by an executive order by US President Harry S. Truman to facilitate the recovery and investigation of alien spacecraft. The conspiracy gained notoriety over the years after the Federal Bureau of Investigation, or the FBI for short, declared the documents to be completely bogus, with many ufologists still considering them to be an elaborate hoax. The Majestic 12 remains popular among UFO conspiracy theorists, and the concept has appeared in popular culture, including things like television, film, video games, and various forms of literature. Another example of the Maury UFO incident being retold over the years is the UFO Investigator's Handbook, which was published in 1999, where a Craig Glenday, who, if I've done my research right, is now the editor-in-chief of the Guinness World Records publication, gives the Maury Island incident and Kenneth Arnold's flying disc sighting as examples of notable UFO encounters in the area of Mount Rainier, which he describes as a UFO laboratory. The story of the Maury Island UFO incident continues to be noted locally as well. Again, for example, in 2014, a short film called The Maury Island Incident depicts the hoax and resulting events from Harold Dahl's point of view. Also, the art patron John White commissioned a mural by the artists Nancy and Zach Powell depicting the incident, which is on display at Des Moines, Washington, which is east of Maury Island. And in 2017, the Washington State Senate passed a resolution acknowledging the 70th anniversary of the alleged event. can't really finish this podcast without mentioning the Men in Black, can I? Especially as there are in fact two reasons for bringing them up in the first place, both of which I will go into after I've done this little interesting side note. In popular culture and UFO conspiracy theories, Men in Black, or MIB for short, that's the dog barking by the way, I do apologise, are government agents dressed in dark suits who question, interrogate, harass and even threaten any or some UFO witnesses to keep them silent about what they have seen. The term is also frequently used to describe mysterious men working for unknown organisations, as well as various branches of government who are allegedly tasked with protecting government UFO secrets or performing other strange activities. They are typically described as tall men with expressionless faces, slightly pale skin, who usually wear black suits and black sunglasses. The term Men in Black is generic, as it is used for any unusual, threatening or strangely behaved individual whose appearance on the scene can be linked in some fashion with a UFO sighting, and have supposedly appeared throughout different moments in history. And the two reasons for me to bring them up? Well, the first reason is that one of the Maury Island witnesses, Dahl, claimed that he was later approached by a man in a dark suit and told not to talk about the event. And the other? Well, in 2024, the city of Des Moines, where the mural made by the artists Nancy and Zach Powell depicting the Maury incident is displayed, held their third annual Men in Black birthday bash on the 22nd of June.
Thank you all for taking the time out to listen to this episode of Mark's Unexplained World. In our next episode, show number 155, we are going to be looking at the twisted story of Samantha Azzopardi, the GPO girl. Samantha Lindell Azzopardi is an Australian con artist who has been accused of many incidences of conning families and authorities, not only in her native Australia, but also in Ireland and Canada. In May of 2021, the Melbourne Magistrates Court sentenced her to 2 years imprisonment.
This show was written and researched by myself, Mark Hughes, and proofread and edited by Linda Hughes. The pronunciations, of course, was all mine. The actors in this episode were Mark Hughes, Linda Hughes and Denise Poolar, with special thanks to Neil Packer and the staff at the Haunted Antiques Paranormal Research Centre in Hinckley. And of course a big thank you to everyone for listening. We never run out of ideas here at the office for Mark's Unexplained World podcast, but if you do know of any other intriguing stories under the Unexplained banner, including ufology, hauntings, disasters and any other sort of paranormal phenomena, as well as true crime, unsolved crime and missing people, just drop me a direct message and I'll see what I can do. I'll also include the name of the person who suggested the idea in the end credits of the podcast, if they're happy for me to do so, of course. And again, just to add, if you are listening to this show on YouTube, please give us a review and a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And if you are listening on any of the other podcast platforms, again, give us a like and a follow. I thank you in advance. Mark's Unexplained World, because there's more to the paranormal than meets the third guy. And remember guys, keep it real, because being real is better than being perfect. No AI was used or harmed in the making of this or any other episode of Mark's Unexplained World. This show and all its contents are covered by basic copyright of Mark the Medium.